Thank you, everybody, for inviting me. I'm a palliative care doctor. Well, I'm looking around at the audience. I'm going to give you an average age of 40. And there's about 80 people here. So that's 3,200 years of life experience in the room. Now, how many of you have sat at the bedside of a dying person? One dying person. How many of you have sat at the bedside of 5 dying people? Oh, okay. 20. Okay, well, you are either palliative care people, chaplains, or mass murderers. So, my sister gave me this book as a present, and it made me really anxious. I worked out that even if I live till 100, I've got to read 3 books a week. So why did it make me anxious? There's a deep apprehension about our mortality. Ernest Becker wrote about this in his book, Denial of Death. He felt that death anxiety underpinned most of our culture and most of our behaviour. Death anxiety defined as a deep apprehension about our mortality and our ceasing to exist. Now, Professor Sheldon Solomon in New York, one of my heroes, has researched how our anxiety about death affects behaviour, and he particularly looked at 9/11 and what happened in New York City after that tragedy. And he found that actually there were good things and bad things. People coped with the anxiety about death because everybody felt that their days were numbered. They connected more. They talked to each other more, so there was a big focus on interpersonal connection. But perhaps what also happened is people became much more attached to their own worldview, our tribal nature, and I think this is what is possibly happening in the world now, with populism, patriotism, and fear of the other. So if we think about illness and death, it raises our death anxiety. Sheldon Solomon calls this mortality salience. We become more aware of death. And the antidotes to it are many, and that's what we need to key into, I think, in this commission. So this was, okay, the book on the left, How Not to Die. I saw this at a bookshop in a London rail station a few weeks ago. So you can either buy How Not to Die, I don't recommend it, or Worm at the Core, which is Sheldon Solomon's book on what happens when we become very anxious about death. So what are our routes to managing our death anxiety? There are many routes, and Stephen Cave, a modern philosopher, some of you will have read his book. He talks about creativity, religion, spiritual approaches, how we defend ourselves from immortality or persuade ourselves that we are immortal. But perhaps the biggest route to immortality, and what we're talking about today, is medicine. So medicine can fix all of our organs now, apart from our brain. Medicine can unblock any of our tubes. I don't know if you know that we are really just a collection of different tubes. Okay, nobody has realised that, but that's what we are. Medicine can replace almost all of our body parts, and medicine has become a system of tasks and interventions. And they tell us that about 1/3 of all healthcare in the States is of no benefit. So why are we doing all this? And where has the concept of healing gone? You know, heal is the first 4 letters of the word health. But healing, like death, has vanished from medicine. I think we now have organ-centred care. You know, there's a lot of talk about person-centred care. I don't see it in the places I work. I work in a busy cancer hospital in London and in a hospice outside London. I see organ-centred care, event-centred care. I don't see person-centred or relationship-centred or family-centred care. So the amazing ability of medicine to fix bits of us has raised our expectations of immortality. And whatever you read, doctors are still treated like priests, it's where the power is. Somebody once said that expectations, though, are resentments under construction. So there's a lot of resentment out there because we may be fixed, but we're miserable. And the promise of cradle to grave has led doctors, it feels, to do too much, and to question too little. So we overdiagnose ordinary life, we create new syndromes, we give lively children drugs and call them ADHD. Risk factors suddenly need pills, and we diagnose things too early, things that may not turn into illnesses. So I'm interested in the concept of limits, because there are no limits in the West to many aspects of our life. There's no limits to our knowledge via the internet. There's no limits to our money, because we can borrow so much. There's no limits to the amount of food in our supermarkets. And now we seem to have no limits to medicine. So very briefly, 2 cases from last week. I met Edith. She's about 84. She lives with Bill in London in a flat. She's a bit breathless because one of her heart valves has started to leak. The cardiologist she saw wanted to do a new operation to repair her heart valve. The operation cost £50,000. The risk is a stroke and death in intensive care. So this is high risk, high cost medicine, which may have no value to Edith. Costanci said, I haven't got the full reference there, in hospital now, you can only die when medical staff declare you can die. I think that's true. That's what I'm seeing. So the other patient I met this week, was Jane. She's immobile at home with a devastating neurological illness. I visited her, she cried a lot, and somehow we found ourselves talking about horses. She'd been a keen horsewoman before her illness was diagnosed, and she's now confined to bed. I told her about one of the hospice nurses who was using her own horse to explore how horses could help with anxiety. I offered the possibility of Jane meeting the nurse and this horse, and her eyes lit up. So this is low risk, low cost, possibly, high value medicine. Not possible everywhere, I know, and I also stopped 7 out of her 10 medicines, which weren't helping, but it's just an example of thinking differently. So there is a toxic combination, this is my perspective, of medical possibility, of reduced connection in society, and the absence of right conversations. Our conversations about the future in medicine have been relegated to talking about the last heartbeat, resuscitation, which Richard has already mentioned. When I discussed this with a patient a few weeks ago, she said, "When my heart stops, I think I'll get the message." We also discuss, okay, I've only got 1 minute. We also discuss where people want to die, often a ridiculous question. People are more interested in a safe place to die. Kieran Sweeney was a doctor who died of cancer, and he was very critical of the conversations his doctors didn't have with him. And he talked about a hesitation to be brave. And I think that's what we'll learn about today. How can we be braver in these conversations? David Roy was a bioethicist in Canada, another of my heroes. So my provocation is that braver conversations will be an antidote to some of the over-medicalization. I don't think we do need less medicine. I don't think we can stop the progress of medicine, but we do need more conversations and more connection. So, how can we tame our medical superpowers? We will hear more later. I think that's probably where I want to stop. Have I got 2 more slides? Yes, this is a great article from a few years ago where an elderly lady who loved gardening decided not to take her blood thinners because she didn't want to fall over and bleed to death. She would rather risk having a cardiac abnormality than take her medicines. And finally, there's a great festival starting in New York today called Reimagine End of Life. There's over now 400 events going on. We need to think about how we can recreate this in the UK, maybe reimagine Bristol next year. We need to talk about death. Doctors need to talk differently to people. We all need to talk differently to each other and within our own families. And that's it. Thank you.